The wall split open with a sound like a gunshot, and I dropped the flashlight so fast it rolled under the sink. For 1 second, everything went black. Then lightning flashed through the kitchen window, and I saw it clearly, a narrow door hidden behind the pantry wall, painted the exact same color as the plaster, with a brass knob that looked too clean to belong in a house this old. And from the crack beneath it, a thin line of warm yellow light slid across the floor. I stopped breathing. The power had been flickering all evening. Half the house was dead. I had already shut off the breaker twice. There should not have been any light behind a door I didn't know existed. Then I heard it. Not a rat, not pipes, not wind. A chair scraping softly across the floor on the other side. My hand flew to my mouth. I stood there in my father's kitchen, soaked from the storm, heart beating so hard it hurt, staring at a hidden room inside a house I had inherited 3 days earlier. And the worst part was this: someone was inside. I backed up so fast, I hit the counter. A glass tipped over and shattered on the tile. The scraping stopped. For a second, the whole world went still, like the house itself was listening. Then the doorknob moved. Not fast, not violently. Slowly, deliberately, I grabbed the first thing I could reach, a rusted fireplace poker I had dragged in from the living room, and held it with both hands even though they were shaking. I wanted to run, but the front door was on the other side of the kitchen. If whoever was in there came out first, I'd have to go past them. The knob turned halfway, then stopped. I heard a woman's voice, barely above a whisper. "Nora." My knees almost gave out. No one in this town was supposed to know I was there. But that wasn't the worst part. I hadn't heard that voice in 24 years, and I still knew it. At least, I thought I did. And that was impossible, because according to everyone who raised me, my mother had walked out when I was 7 and never looked back. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Rain hammered the roof. Somewhere upstairs, a loose window banged open and shut. The brass knob slowly returned to place. Then the light under the door went dark. I stood there frozen for maybe 2 minutes. Maybe 10. Long enough for my arm to go numb from holding the poker. Long enough for the smell of wet dust and old wood to turn my stomach. When I finally moved, I didn't open the door. I ran out of the kitchen, grabbed my keys, and locked myself inside my car with the engine running and the windshield fogging around me. I was 31 years old, newly divorced, broke, humiliated, and sitting in a storm outside my dead father's house like a terrified child. And somehow that hidden door scared me less than the name that voice had used: Nora. Only 3 people had ever said my name like that: my grandmother, my childhood best friend Julian, and my mother. I hadn't seen my mother since the day she disappeared, but that wasn't the same thing as forgetting her. You don't forget the first wound that ever teaches you what loneliness feels like. You just build your life around it and pretend it isn't still there. My father had spent years telling me she was selfish, unstable, weak. My Aunt Diane had polished those words until they sounded like facts. By the time I was 15, I had stopped asking questions. By 20, I had learned how to answer for her when people got curious. She left. Short, clean, final. It was easier than admitting I still checked every unfamiliar female face in grocery stores. And then everything changed, because 6 months before the storm, my husband Caleb had done almost the same thing, not with mystery, not with silence, with a text message sent while I was at work. "I'm sorry, I can't do this anymore." By the time I got home, half the apartment was empty. My savings were gone from the joint account. 2 weeks later, I found out he'd been seeing someone from his office for almost a year. 3 weeks after that, I lost my marketing job in a company downsizing and stopped pretending my life was still under control. When my father died from a stroke, I almost didn't come to the funeral. We hadn't been close in years. He loved control more than love itself, and once I got old enough to notice, being around him felt like breathing in a room with no windows. But I came because guilt is powerful, and because Aunt Diane said the house had been left to me. That part shocked everyone. My father didn't leave me warmth, apologies, or answers. He left me a rotting 2-story house at the edge of town, An overgrown yard, unpaid property taxes, and rooms full of things no one wanted to sort through. Diane called it a blessing. I called it a burden with plumbing issues. My plan was simple: clean fast, sell faster, and use whatever money was left to start over somewhere no one knew my name. I had been in the house for 3 days when the storm hit, and until that moment in the kitchen, the worst thing I'd found was mold behind the bathroom sink and a stack of unopened bills from 10 years ago. Then the pantry wall cracked when I leaned on it to reset the breaker, and suddenly I was sitting in my car at midnight with my hands frozen on the steering wheel, trying to decide whether I had heard a ghost, a burglar, or my own damaged brain. I almost called 911. Instead, I called Julian. He picked up on the second ring. "Nora?" Hearing his voice made something in my chest loosen. Julian had lived next door when we were kids. He used to sneak me comic books through the fence when my father grounded me for things like laughing too loudly. He was 33 now, broad-shouldered, quiet, and worked as a contractor after leaving the fire department because of a knee injury. He had been the one person at the funeral who looked at me like I was still human instead of gossip. "Can you come over?" I asked. He didn't ask why. "I'm on my way." That should have comforted me. It didn't. Because while I waited, staring at the dark windows of the house, one light came on upstairs. I knew I hadn't left one on. What I saw next made my skin go cold. A shadow moved across the second-floor hallway. Not fast, not random, like someone who knew exactly where they were going. By the time Julian's truck pulled into the driveway, I was outside the car in the rain, pacing like I'd lost my mind. He jumped out, took one look at my face, and said, "Tell me everything." So I did. The hidden door, the light, the voice, the upstairs shadow. I expected him to give me that careful look people use when they think you're fragile. Instead, he just glanced at the house and said, "Stay behind me." He grabbed a heavy flashlight from his truck, then a pry bar from the back seat. We went in through the front door together, shoes tracking rainwater across the wood floor. The house smelled like wet plaster and old smoke. Every sound felt magnified. We checked upstairs first. Nothing. Every room was empty. No open windows except the one banging in the guest room. No broken locks. No sign that anyone had come through the front or back. Then we went to the kitchen. The hidden door was still there, closed, silent, dark. Julian crouched, studied the frame, and ran his fingers over the edges. "This isn't original," he muttered. "Someone concealed it later, but not recently." I swallowed hard. "Can you open it?" He looked at me once before reaching for the knob. It turned. The door opened inward with a dry groan. And behind it was not a crawl space, not storage, not unfinished concrete. It was a room, a real room. A narrow but fully finished sitting room with warm cream walls, a woven rug, a lamp glowing on a side table, and a blue armchair facing a bookshelf. Past that, through an archway, I could see a neatly made bed with a folded quilt at the foot. There were framed prints on the walls, fresh flowers in a small vase, a kettle on a hot plate. I took one step in and forgot how to breathe. Someone had been living there, but that wasn't the strangest part. The room didn't feel random, it felt familiar. On the bookshelf sat the exact hardback copy of The Secret Garden my grandmother used to read to me. On the side table lay a white ceramic horse with one chipped ear, the twin of a figurine I had broken as a child. A knitted mustard blanket covered the arm of the chair in the same crooked stitch pattern my mother used when she taught me to hold yarn. Julian turned slowly, taking it all in. "Nora, I know. No, that's wrong. I didn't know anything." I walked toward the bedroom as if I were sleepwalking. The bed was made with fresh sheets. A cardigan hung on the closet door. There was a half-full glass of water on the nightstand, and when I touched it, it was still cool. My heart started hammering again. Someone had been here tonight. Then Julian pointed to the dresser. There. A framed photo stood in the corner. It was me. Not a childhood picture, a recent one, maybe 2 years old. I was leaving a grocery store, looking down at my phone. I had no memory of anyone taking it. Behind me, taped to the mirror, were more photographs. Me at different ages. Me in college. Me outside my old office. Me crying at my grandmother's funeral. My stomach turned so violently I had to grab the dresser to stay upright. Who would do this? I whispered. Julian's voice went low and careful. Someone who's been watching you. The room suddenly felt smaller. The warm light turned sickening. Every object became proof that I had never been alone as much as I thought. And then I saw the handwriting. A note on the bedside table. Just 3 words. For when she comes. I knew that handwriting. I had once spent whole afternoons tracing the same looping letters from old recipe cards I refused to throw away. My mother's. I staggered back so hard I hit the wall. Julian caught my elbow. Sit down. I can't. Nora, sit. I sat on the edge of the bed because my legs wouldn't hold me. My hands were ice cold. I wanted to deny it, but denial became impossible when I opened the top dresser drawer. Inside were birthday cards, every year from age 8 to 31, all addressed to me. None ever opened. I think that was the moment the real damage began, not when I heard the voice, not when I saw the room, when I saw proof that someone had been reaching for me all these years and I had never known, and I still didn't know why. Julian drove me to his place that night because I refused to sleep in the house, and because he said, very calmly, that if someone had access to a hidden room, they might have access to the rest of the property too. He gave me the couch, a blanket, and tea I didn't drink. At 3 in the morning, I opened the first birthday card. My sweet Nora, if this ever reaches you, I need you to know I never left, because I stopped loving you. The rest of the sentence blurred through tears before I could finish it. I shoved the card shut. I wasn't ready. That was the truth. People love dramatic answers until they're sitting in front of one. Then suddenly, confusion feels safer than certainty. If my mother didn't abandon me, then my whole life had been built on a lie. And if my father lied, then what else had he stolen from me besides her? At 7 the next morning, Aunt Diane called. I'm coming by at 10, she said. The realtor wants updated pictures. I sat up straighter. I'm not ready for a realtor. There was a pause. Nora, you can barely afford the utilities on that house, let's be realistic. I found something. Her tone sharpened. What does that mean? A hidden room. Silence. Not surprise? Not confusion. Silence. My hand tightened around the phone. You knew. Diane recovered too fast. Old houses have strange layouts. It was furnished. Another silence. Then don't go snooping through things that don't concern you. A cold wave slid through me. It's my house. That house has a lot of history, she snapped. Some of it is better left alone. Then she hung up. I stared at the phone. Julian, standing in the kitchen doorway with coffee in his hand, had heard enough to read my face. She knows something. Yes. Then we don't wait for her to decide how much to tell us. He came with me back to the house. The hidden room looked the same in daylight, only somehow stranger. The soft lamp glow felt less comforting, more staged. Julian checked the walls, floor, and closet while I forced myself to open more of the cards. Each one was dated on my birthday. Each one was written in the same hand. Some were short, some were pages long. They were full of tiny details about my life, my first day of college, the coffee shop where I worked at 19, the red coat I wore for 3 winters straight. My mother knew things no absent stranger should know. But every letter also carried the same ache. I am close, even when I shouldn't be. I watch because it is all I have left. One day you will understand why I stayed away. I hated that sentence. Stayed away. It sounded too much like leaving, even with prettier words. And then everything got worse. Because while Julian was checking the bookshelf, he found a false back panel. Inside, it was a stack of grocery receipts from the last 3 months, a set of house keys, and a medication bottle with the label partially peeled off. The name that remained was enough. Elena M. remained was enough. Elena M. My mother's first name was Elena. Recent receipts. Active medication. Fresh water. Recent photos. She wasn't dead. She wasn't gone. She had been here. Maybe she still was. A floorboard creaked above us. Julian's head snapped up. So did mine. This time we both heard footsteps moving across the ceiling, slow and careful, from the hallway toward the back stairs. He took off running. I followed before fear could stop me. By the time we reached the upstairs hall, there was no one there, but the back door downstairs stood open, moving slightly in the wind. Julian cursed under his breath and ran outside. I stopped in the kitchen, chest heaving, staring at the open door and the muddy print left on the threshold. It was small, a woman's shoe. I stepped into the yard and saw Julian at the fence line, scanning the alley behind the house. There was someone, he said. I heard the gate. My whole body shook. Did you see her? No. I don't know why that disappointed me as much as it terrified me. Maybe because a shape would have been easier than questions. That afternoon, Diane arrived in a cream-colored blazer and expensive sunglasses, carrying grief like an accessory she planned to wear until the paperwork was done. She stopped dead in the kitchen when she saw the hidden door standing open. For the first time in my life, I saw fear crack her face. Not grief, not annoyance. Fear. You opened it, she said. I crossed my arms. Were you planning to mention it? Her eyes flicked past me, searching the room. You shouldn't be in there. Why? She ignored the question. This changes nothing. The house still needs to be sold. No. She stared at me. Excuse me? I said no. Not until I know whose room this was and why there are 30 years of letters to me inside it. Julian stepped into the doorway behind her, silent but solid. Diane noticed him and tightened. This is a family matter, she said sharply. Then start acting like family, I shot back. Her jaw moved. Your mother was sick. The words hit like a slap. I felt myself go cold. That's what Dad always said. Because it was true. What kind of sick woman writes her daughter a birthday card every year and hides it in a room inside the same house? Diane's mouth opened, then closed. And that was answer enough. But that wasn't the worst part. Before she left, she turned at the front door and said, If Elena is back, Nora, she will ruin your life all over again. Just like she ruined your father's. Then she walked out as if she hadn't just set fire to the ground beneath me. For the rest of the day, I moved through the house like a sleepwalker. I kept finding signs I had missed before. A second mug washed and drying near the sink. A tiny bundle of lavender hanging in the pantry. A blanket folded on the back porch swing that didn't belong to me or my father. The more I noticed, the more the house stopped feeling empty. At sunset, I found the second entrance. Julian was in the basement tracing pipelines when he knocked against a wall under the stairs and heard the hollow space. Behind a stack of paint cans sat a narrow passage leading up to the hidden room through a panel concealed inside the bedroom closet. Whoever used that room could come and go without touching the kitchen door. It's designed like a safe room, Julian said. Or a place to hide. Hide from who? The answer felt close enough to touch, and still I couldn't reach it. That night I insisted on staying in the house. Julian argued, I refused. In the end, he brought over an air mattress and said he'd take the couch in the living room whether I liked it or not. I told him he was being dramatic. He told me I was being rebellious. Neither of us changed our minds. Around midnight, I woke to the sound of music. Soft. Fragile. Familiar. A music box. I sat up so fast the blanket tangled around my legs. The melody was one I hadn't heard in years, the same lullaby my mother used to hum while brushing my hair. I followed it barefoot into the hallway, every nerve in my body awake. The music led me downstairs, through the dark kitchen and into the hidden room. The lamp was on. On the side table sat a small wooden music box with its lid raised, and beside it lay a plate. 2 slices of toast, still warm. I stumbled back. Julian, I whispered, then louder, Julian. He came running in seconds. One look at the plate and his expression changed. She was just here. Then he saw something over my shoulder. Nora. A shape moved in the bedroom doorway. Not a shadow this time. A woman. She stood half hidden, one hand braced against the frame, as if deciding whether to run. She was thinner than I remembered any adult being, with silver threaded through dark hair and a face made older by pain more than age. She wore a gray cardigan and held herself like someone expecting to be hit. Our eyes met. Mine filled before I could stop them. Because no matter what time had done to her, I knew her. Mothers live in the body longer than memory does. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Then she whispered, "You found it." I should tell you I went to her. I should tell you I cried and everything healed in one impossible moment. That's not what happened. I felt every year between us like a wall. Don't? I said. The word came out broken. She flinched. Julian looked between us and quietly stepped back into the kitchen, giving us space while staying close enough if I needed him. The woman in front of me, my mother, Elena, kept both hands visible, like I was a frightened animal. "I didn't want you to find out like this." A laugh burst out of me, sharp and ugly. Like what? In a secret apartment behind my father's pantry? Tears filled her eyes immediately. "I know." "No, you don't know." My voice started shaking. "I buried you. Do you understand that? I spent half my life telling myself you chose to leave because that hurt less than wondering why I wasn't worth staying for." "I stayed," she whispered. I stared at her. She pressed trembling fingers to her mouth, pulled them away, and said it again, stronger this time. "I stayed as close as I could." Rage hit me so suddenly it almost made me dizzy. "Do not do that. Do not turn this into poetry. Where were you when Dad told me you didn't want me? Where were you when Grandma died? Where were you when I got married? When my life fell apart? You were here? Hiding?" Every question seemed to strike her physically. "Yes," she said to the last one. The room went silent. "What?" She closed her eyes. "Not always here. But sometimes. On and off. After your grandmother helped me." My knees weakened. I grabbed the chair for balance. Grandma knew. She was the only one who believed me. Believed what? That was the real question. It hung between us like smoke. And then everything changed again. Because Elena reached into her cardigan pocket and pulled out a folded legal document so worn the creases looked ready to split. She handed it to me with shaking fingers. It was a restraining order. Against her. Filed by my father. Signed 23 years ago. Reason listed: threat of abduction and emotional instability. I looked up slowly. "This is fake." Her expression said more than words could. "I know. He told everyone you left." "I know. Then why didn't you fight?" Her face broke. "I did." The next hour shattered the version of my life I had been living inside. Elena told me my father had become violent long before she disappeared. Not always with bruises people could photograph. Sometimes with money, threats, isolation. He controlled where she went, who she saw, what she said in public. When she tried to leave with me, he called Diane. Diane's husband was a lawyer then. Between the two of them, they painted Elena as unstable, hysterical, unsafe. There was a custody hearing she barely understood because she had no money, no support, and a prescription from a doctor Diane recommended medicine that left her foggy during testimony. "They said I was paranoid," she whispered, "because I kept telling people Arthur was following me. I thought of the photos in the room." A chill moved through me. "He was?" "Yes." She told me she lost temporary custody first. Then a supervised visit. Then all contact after my father claimed she tried to take me from school. She hadn't. She had come to watch me from across the street because it was the only way she could see me. Diane saw her, called the police, and turned it into proof of stalking. I wanted to reject it. Wanted to say there had to be more. Some missing piece that made my father less monstrous and my mother less lost. But the room itself stood around me like evidence. "You could have come when I turned 18, I said, my voice smaller now. Elena looked down. "I did." I went still. She swallowed. "Your grandmother arranged it." We were going to meet at the diner on Highway 8. I waited 2 hours. Then Diane came instead. My skin went cold. Diane? She said you knew everything and never wanted to see me again. I thought of that summer. How Diane had shown up at my apartment with my grandmother's peach pie and spent 2 hours calling my mother a manipulator after finding out I had started asking questions again. My stomach twisted. She lied, I said. Elena gave me a sad smile that hurt more than tears. I know that now. Back then, I was tired. I believed I was only making things worse for you. No child wants to hear that her mother gave up. No mother wants to admit it. Both can be true and still bleed. But that wasn't the end of it. Elena told me my grandmother had secretly restored the hidden room years earlier. The original space had been built during Prohibition, then sealed. Grandma turned it into a safe place when she realized Arthur was watching the house after Elena started visiting town again. Sometimes Elena stayed there for a night, sometimes for a week. She watched me grow from a distance because it was the only thing she had left. She took those pictures? I asked. Elena nodded, ashamed. Not all of them. Some your grandmother gave me. Some I took. I know how wrong that sounds. It is wrong. I know. The honesty of that landed harder than excuses would have. She didn't ask me to forgive her. She didn't beg. She just stood there looking smaller than memory had made her. And for the first time I understood that pain had not waited only on my side of the door. Julian came back in when the silence stretched too long. Elena stiffened at the sight of him, but he only said, "There's a car at the end of the driveway." We all froze. Diane's SUV. Through the kitchen window, I watched her step out, followed by a man in a dark suit holding a folder. Even from inside, I could feel her anger. "She's early," I whispered. Elena's face drained of color. "She can't see me. Why?" Elena looked at Julian instead of me, because she'll know I found it. "Found what?" I said. But neither of them answered fast enough because Diane was already at the back door. Julian shut the hidden room door just as the handle turned. Diane walked in without waiting to be invited. "There you are. I brought Mr. Lyle. He's here to discuss emergency sale options and—" She stopped when she saw my face. I had never hated anyone with perfect clarity before that moment. Not even Caleb. Hatred needs truth. Now I had some. "You lied to me," I said. Diane's eyes flicked once toward the pantry wall. Barely a movement, still enough. "I protected you. From my mother? From chaos." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Nora, listen to me. Elena is unstable. Whatever story she tells you, she's here. That landed exactly as I wanted it to." Diane went rigid. The lawyer looked confused. "Perhaps this isn't the best time. Leave," I snapped. He did. Fast. The second the door shut, Diane turned on me. "Where is she?" I crossed my arms. "Interesting, that doesn't sound like surprise." Diane's composure cracked. "You don't understand what she is." "No, I don't understand what you are." For a second I thought she might slap me. Instead she smiled cold, practiced, terrifying. "Your father was right. The second she got in your head, you became impossible." Something moved behind the pantry door. Elena stepped out. Diane actually stumbled back. The silence that followed was so sharp it felt like glass. "Elena," Diane said finally, voice thin with disbelief, "you should have stayed gone." My mother lifted her chin. "You should have stopped lying." And then everything got worse, because Diane laughed. Not nervous. Not surprised. Triumphant. "You think this ends with a reunion?" she said. "You really have no idea what you've found." She looked at me, then at the hidden room, and something in my chest tightened. "What is in there?" I asked. Diane's smile vanished. "Nothing that belongs to you." That answer told me everything. Julian stepped between us. "You need to leave." Diane ignored him. Her gaze stayed locked on the pantry wall. "Arthur never should have kept it here." "Kept what?" I shouted. She turned slowly toward me. The only proof that your mother was never innocent, Elena whispered. Don't. It was the fear in her voice that made me move. I pushed past both of them, yanked open the hidden door, and went straight to the bedroom closet where Julian had found the false panel earlier. The shallow compartment was empty. Not empty, exactly. Clean. Too clean. As if something rectangular had been removed recently. I turned around. What was there? No one answered. Then Julian swore softly from the bookshelf. He had pulled the back panel wider and found another cavity deeper inside the wall. Inside was an old cassette recorder, a leather ledger, and a sealed envelope labeled in my father's handwriting. For Nora. Diane lunged. Julian caught her by the arm before she could reach it. The look on her face in that second was not panic anymore. It was exposure. What is this? I asked. No, Diane said. You don't open that. Which of course meant I did. Inside the envelope was a typed letter dated 3 days before my father died. If you are reading this, Diane either failed or I grew a conscience too late. My hand started shaking so badly I had to sit down. The letter was a confession. Not noble, not clean, not enough. But a confession all the same. My father admitted Elena never abandoned me. He admitted he used Diane and her husband's connections to paint her as unstable after she discovered financial irregularities tied to my grandmother's estate and threatened to expose both of them. He admitted Diane had been moving money for years through accounts my father controlled, and that when Elena confronted them, Diane convinced him the easiest solution was to destroy her credibility. I could barely see through the blur in my eyes. Then I reached the line that changed everything again. The hidden room was not used to hide Elena from me. It was used to hide evidence from Diane. My father wrote that he turned on Diane near the end, not out of morality, but because he realized she had been stealing from him too. He hid the ledger, audio tapes, and property transfer documents in the room because it was the one place she could never search without admitting what they had done. I looked at the ledger in Julian's hand. My whole body went numb. Diane whispered. Arthur cowered. Elena stared at her like she'd finally lost the strength to be shocked. But that wasn't the biggest twist. Julian opened the ledger and went quiet. Then he turned a page toward me. There, in columns and dates, were payments pulled from my grandmother's accounts during the years of her illness. Transfers. Cash withdrawals. Legal fees. Care expenses that were fake. At the bottom of several pages was a note that made my stomach drop. Nora College Fund reallocated. I looked up so fast my neck hurt. Diane didn't even deny it. You stole from Grandma, I said. She was dying. You stole from me. I kept this family standing. Her voice cracked through the room like a whip. Do you think your father could maintain that house? Pay his debts? Keep up appearances? Somebody had to make choices. You stole my future. I preserved what mattered. Elena let out a sound between a laugh and a sob. You always talk like theft becomes sacrifice if you say it calmly enough. Diane rounded on her. You ruined everything the second you started asking questions. I asked where the money went. You should have stayed out of it. The truth landed so hard I felt sick. This wasn't about custody first. It wasn't even about Arthur's ego first. It started with money, with greed. Elena had been erased because she saw too much. I remembered every time Diane told me family was complicated, every time she stepped in as the sensible adult, every time she twisted pity into loyalty. She hadn't protected me. She had managed me. And now she was cornered. What came next shocked me even more. Elena picked up the cassette recorder. There's more, she said. Diane lunged again. But this time, I stepped in front of her. Don't. My voice came out so hard that all three of them paused. I had spent most of my life avoiding conflict, apologizing before I even understood what I had done wrong, shrinking myself so people couldn't accuse me of being difficult. In that moment, something old and weak inside me finally cracked. Sit down, I told Diane. She stared at me. Sit. Down. Maybe it was my face. Maybe it was the ledger in Julian's hand. Maybe it was the sound of sirens faintly rising from the street because Julian had quietly called the police while we were arguing. Whatever it was, Diane sat. Elena pressed play. My father's voice filled the room, thinner than I remembered, but unmistakable. If Diane is hearing this, then she waited too long to search the house. Julian looked at me once. I couldn't move. On the tape, my father spoke in halting breaths. He said he had lied about Elena. He said Diane encouraged every step. He said Elena never harmed me, never threatened to take me, never stopped loving me. He said Diane intercepted letters, gifts, and one attempt at contact when I was 18. He said he let it happen because he was angry, proud, and afraid Elena would expose the money. Then came the part that made even Diane lose color. Arthur admitted the will leaving me the house had a condition attached and a second document. If the property was sold quickly, certain sealed boxes from the basement were to go directly to Diane without inventory. Julian swore under his breath. Diane had been pushing the sale because she wanted the evidence. My father's voice ended with a sentence I will never forget. I took her mother. Diane took everything else. If Nora finds this, let her choose what happens now. The tape clicked off. No one spoke. The sirens were louder now. Diane stood suddenly. He's dead. You have no idea what can be proved and what can't. I rose too. Try me. She looked at me then the way she never had before. Not as a child to direct, not as a problem to manage, but as a threat. You think this makes Elena innocent? She hissed. You think watching you from shadows was love? She should have dragged you out of that house and run. Elena's face folded in on itself. I turned to her. Why didn't you? She met my eyes with devastating honesty. Because I was afraid he would win again, and because after enough years, shame starts sounding like reason. That hurt because I understood it. I had stayed too long with Caleb for the same reason. Not because I didn't know better. Because humiliation teaches you to doubt your own instincts. Because once someone controls the story about you, fighting back feels ridiculous. Outside, car door slammed. Diane heard it too and made one last move, not toward the front door, but toward the hidden room. Toward the closet. There are more papers, she said under her breath, almost to herself. Julian blocked her path. She swung at him. He caught her wrist easily, but in the struggle, she knocked the side table over, sending the lamp crashing. Glass shattered. Elena gasped. I ran for the bedroom and yanked open every drawer, every panel, every box I could find. Behind the bed frame, taped underneath the slats, my fingers hit something thick. A packet. I pulled it free just as Diane shoved past Julian and grabbed my shoulder hard enough to bruise. Give me that. No. She squeezed harder. You stupid girl. Do you have any idea what people lose when records like that surface? Yes, I said, voice shaking with fury. Apparently, mothers, homes, childhoods. Then I did something the old version of me never would have done. I pushed her. Not wildly, not theatrically. Just enough. Enough to break her grip. Enough to send her stumbling back into the dresser. Enough to show both of us I was done being handled. And then everything reached its breaking point. The police came in through the kitchen while Diane was still shouting. 2 officers separated us. Julian handed over the ledger, the tape, my father's letter, and the packet from under the bed. Inside were photocopies of account transfers, fake medical invoices, and a notarized statement from my grandmother, made a year before her death. In it, she said she believed Elena had been framed and that Diane had manipulated Arthur for years. She wrote that the hidden room should pass to me with its contents if the truth ever becomes necessary. I nearly collapsed reading it. Grandma had known I would need more than love. I would need proof. Diane kept insisting it was all old family confusion, all misinterpreted, all impossible to untangle now. But financial fraud is less emotional on paper than in memory. Numbers don't panic. Signatures don't cry. Documents don't change their minds. One of the officers stepped aside to make a call. The other asked Elena for identification and listened longer than I expected when she explained the restraining order history. Julian filled in details. I answered questions with a steadiness I did not feel. At some point, Diane stopped talking and just stared at me. It should have felt victorious. Instead, I felt hollow. Because justice, when it finally arrives, doesn't hand you back the years. It just stops the bleeding from getting worse. After they took Diane outside, the house went quiet in a way I had never heard before. Not empty, not haunted. Released. I stood in the kitchen trembling, surrounded by broken glass and scattered papers, and realized I was crying so hard I could barely see. Elena moved toward me slowly, like before. This time I didn't stop her. When she put her arms around me, it wasn't cinematic. It was awkward, hesitant, full of lost time. But it was real. I held on anyway, and for a few seconds I was 7 and 31 at the same time. Angry, relieved, grieving, warm. "I'm sorry," she whispered into my hair. I didn't say it was okay. It wasn't, but I also didn't let go. But that wasn't the end. The investigation lasted months. Diane was charged with fraud, embezzlement, evidence tampering, and obstruction after more records surfaced from the basement boxes she'd been desperate to get. Her late husband's old firm records opened other doors. Neighbors remembered things. Old clerks found archived filings. Even the school office had a record of Elena being turned away from seeing me years ago. Truth had been buried, but not buried well enough. The restraining order was formally reviewed and later nullified. Elena cried in a courthouse hallway over a piece of paper 23 years too late. I cried with her. The house sale was stopped. My father's estate was reopened. Some of the money could never be recovered, but enough was traced back to restore part of what had been taken from my college fund and my grandmother's accounts. For the first time in a long time, my future didn't feel like a locked room. And Julian quiet, stubborn Julian was there for all of it. He fixed the broken pantry wall but left the hidden door visible because, he said, some things shouldn't be covered up again. He helped me repair the plumbing, sand the floors, and clear out decades of stale grief from the attic. He never pushed, never asked me to heal on schedule. Some nights we sat on the back porch in silence while Elena slept in the room that had once hidden her. Yes, slept there openly. For a while she couldn't bear any other place. We learned each other slowly after that, not as mother and child in the easy sense, more like two people crossing a damaged bridge, one careful plank at a time. Some days I wanted answers she couldn't give. Some days she apologized so much I had to leave the room. Some days we laughed unexpectedly over burnt toast or terrible television, and the sound of it hurt because it should have existed years earlier. Healing is rude like that. It shows you what was stolen while giving a little back. One afternoon, I opened the last unopened birthday card. It was for my 30th birthday, written before my father died. If I never get the courage to stand in front of you, I hope you still build a life that feels like yours, not one shaped by people who confuse control with love. I read that line 3 times. Then I folded the card, carried it downstairs, and sat in the hidden room until sunset. The room looked different by then, less like a hiding place, more like a witness. We kept the bookshelf, the blue chair, the chipped ceramic horse. I painted the bedroom walls a softer color and moved the old surveillance-like photos into a box because some forms of love carry damage they shouldn't keep displaying. In their place, Elena and I began adding new pictures. Ones taken in daylight, ones where everyone knew they were seen. I wish I could tell you forgiveness arrived all at once. It didn't. Some mornings I still woke up furious, at my father, at Diane, at Elena, at myself for how quickly one kind word from my mother could make the child in me want to collapse into trust. But strength isn't never shaking. Strength is shaking and still deciding what happens next. So I made choices. I kept the house. Not because it was perfect, not because it didn't carry ghosts, because for the first time, it belonged to me more than it belonged to the lies told inside it. I turned the hidden room into a small reading room and writing space. Elena started volunteering at a women's legal aid center in the next county, helping others fill out forms she once had no power to fight. Julian and I. Well, some love stories don't enter with fireworks. Some arrive with a toolbox, coffee, and the patience to stand in your doorway until you're ready to trust what gentle looks like. The first time he kissed me was in the kitchen after we finished repainting the cabinets. My hands were covered in dust. My face had a streak of white paint across the nose. He smiled, touched that spot with his thumb, and said, "You know, you don't have to run every time something good stays." I laughed, then cried, then kissed him anyway. Very on brand for me. A year after the storm, Elena and I held a small dinner in the house. Nothing fancy. Pasta, cheap wine, candles that burned unevenly. For dessert, I used my grandmother's recipe cards and baked the peach pie Diane once carried into my apartment like a weapon. This time it tasted like ours. After everyone left, I stood alone in the kitchen and looked at the hidden door. I used to think the worst thing a house could hold was a secret room. I was wrong. The worst thing a house can hold is a lie repeated so many times it becomes the air inside it. And the best thing? The moment someone finally opens the door. If there's a lesson in all of this, it's not that blood always wins, or that broken families magically repair themselves. They don't. Some damage stays. Some apologies come too late. Some people die before they say the one thing you needed to hear. The lesson is smaller and harder and more useful. Control is not love. Silence is not peace. And being left in the dark does not mean you were never wanted. I spent half my life believing I had been abandoned. In the end, the truth was messier than that, and more painful, and somehow kinder too. My mother did fail me. My father betrayed me. My aunt stole from me. All of that is true. But another truth survived under the floorboards. Someone kept a room ready for me. Someone believed I might come. And when I finally opened that hidden door, I didn't just find a secret in my house. I found the part of my life that had been waiting all along for me to stop accepting the story other people wrote about me.